The following is a presentation of the Howard County Poetry and Literature Society.
Hello, I'm Roland Flint. I'm happy to have a chance today to sit down with Lucille Clifton, one of my favorite poets. I'm not alone in this. Denise Levertov has written that Lucille Clifton is one of the 4 or 5 of our most authentic and profound living American poets. I've known Lucille a long time. We've given some readings together, and it's fun to look forward to hearing some of her poems, mostly old ones, but perhaps some new ones as well. Lucille was born in New York, but has lived in Baltimore a number of years, and I do think of her as a Maryland poet. Even though for a few years before this she has been a professor of English at the University of California in Santa Cruz. Happily for us, she's back here now and has just accepted an appointment as Distinguished Professor of Humanities at St. Mary's College in Maryland. She's published 7 books of poems, but also a memoir called Generations. Her most recent books of poems are Good Woman and Next, and she's the author as well of about 20 children's books. Well, Lucille, it's nice to see you. I wonder, first of all, why you moved from a paradise like Santa Cruz back to a paradise like St. Mary's. I do think that's a beautiful place.
Yes, it is. It is. And people ask me that all the time. Why would I leave paradise? But every paradise has a serpent in it, and so does Santa Cruz, and I suppose so does St. Mary's. And I'm very fond of Maryland. People do think of me as a Maryland poet, and except for the people in Buffalo, New York, which is my hometown and where I lived and where my children were born. And I think that St. Mary's, which is a young school and a school that is very committed to lots of things, and among them the arts, is a place where I feel supported as a poet, and I think I'm going to enjoy it. Well,
you, among your many prizes and awards, I know you were nominated for a Pulitzer once and for an Emmy as well.
Yeah.
And that among those, as I say, you were a Poet Laureate of Maryland.
I was Poet Laureate of Maryland for some years, yes.
So it must feel like coming home.
Oh, it is.
I think you have family, some family here
Yes,
as
I
well.
do. And it is. It has become home to me, and I think I care about Maryland.
It even feels like home to me, a North Dakota boy.
That's interesting.
I've been here about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how about some poems, Lucille? That's a real reason for sitting down today. So here's some of your wonderful poems.
I'll read some. I'll start with some early poems, and I don't even read a lot of the newer poems, a lot of the older poems anymore. But this is one that's called Good Times, and my first book was called Good Times, and I think that I had not read a lot of poems like this in this kind of language when this poem was written. My daddy has paid the rent, and the insurance man is gone, and the lights is back on, and my Uncle Broad has hit for $1 straight, and they is good times, good times, good times. My mama has made bread, and Grandpa has come, and everybody is drunk and dancing in the kitchen and singing in the kitchen. Oh, these is good times, good times, good times. Oh, children, think about the good times.
I remember that one, an old favorite.
That's a poem that, I mean, poems come out of our lives, and that certainly is one that comes out of my life.
I was interested, you said when you wrote it, poems weren't being written in this kind of language.
Or I hadn't seen them.
I think I know what you mean, but...
Well, it's in an oral language, a language where the sound of the spoken word is the sound that matters. Traditionally, poetry has been written and then kind of elevated, or we think of, when a lot of people think of poetry, they think of an elevated kind of formal use of the language.
Yes.
And I'm into sound and into the way people talk. This is one about an eviction. And somebody once asked me, do you know what you're talking about? Indeed, I do, having been evicted on more than one occasion, actually. It's called The First. What I remember about that day is boxes stacked across the walk and couch springs curling through the air and drawers and tables balanced on the curb and us hollering leaping up and around, happy to have a playground. Nothing about the emptied rooms, nothing about the emptied family. I think I took a child's perspective on what it's like to have your things set out on the street. And there's always, and as a poet, I suppose, one of the things I think about is the more than one way of seeing something. This is a poem. This is my favorite my poem, excepting for, you know how your favorite poem is the one you just wrote, right?
Exactly.
Or the one nobody likes.
Or the one you're working
right,
on. Right,
yeah. Exactly. But this is probably my favorite older poem, and this was interesting because it came all at once. It came sort of as a whole. It's called Flowers. Here we are, running with the weeds, colors exaggerated, pistols wild, embarrassing the calm family flowers. Oh, here we are, flourishing for the field, and the name of the place is Love.
It's lovely.
Thank you. That's about black people, but it's about poets too.
Yeah, that's about poetry too, in a way.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. Occasionally they come all at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, there's one, and I will try to find it, about myself. It's called Lucy One Eye.
Page 45, maybe.
Well,
Or is that the
maybe
wrong
it's, yes, maybe it's in this one. People think poets know where their poems are. That would be nice, wouldn't it? I often have no idea where my poems are. Here we are. Now this poem was written, for one thing, I have only one eye that's really very good. I always say in my left eye I can't see, but with my right eye I can see more than is there, you know? And I always thought of myself as a person who didn't seem to manage to do the things that people did as a matter of course, but I always had my own little things. And I think another thing I like about this poem is that my editor couldn't stand it. And actually the editor of the book this poem was in was Toni Morrison. And Toni did not like the last line of this poem. And at that time, while I was in one way, I was in awe of Toni Morrison. But on the other hand, I write poems and she writes prose. So I figure I know poems, you know, so I kept the last line. Lucy One Eye. She got her mama's ways. Big round roller, can't cook, can't clean. If that's what you want, you got it, world. Lucy One Eye. She see the world sideways. Word foolish. She say what she don't want to say. She don't say what she want to. Lucy One Eye. She won't walk away from it. She'll keep on trying with her crooked look and her wrinkled ways. The darling girl.
How could she not like that?
Well, I don't know what she thought. I mean, you know, I am a darling girl, so why didn't I say so?
But it's perfect for the poem.
I thought so.
I mean,
I thought
it's
it worked.
affectionate in a way that's all prepared for and
Sure.
forgiven ahead of time.
I think so.
I think it's wonderful.
Well, Toni didn't like it.
It's funny. Someone described the imagination as the third eye.
Ah.
And you've always had that for me. So
Well,
I guess you can have one eye that's
I
literal
suppose it
eye.
balances that it works out because in the one I see nothing.
You have another poem in which you talk about not being able to dance.
Oh, I can't dance. No, it's. I blow all the stereotypes. I don't do anything you're supposed to. But then I once was talking to a poet in California. His name is Naomi Clark, and I was talking about being on a faculty. And I was saying, Naomi, I don't know all of these things that people on faculties know. I don't know these things. And she said, but Lucille, you know one thing. And I said, well, I do. So it works out. It works out. Well, now this is this poem. I read this for the senior citizens, and I think it was well received because I think it's something that everybody somewhere in themselves knows something about.
Lucille today was at a luncheon meeting at the Florence Baines Center of the Senior Citizens, a place I've read before too. A very big audience, I think, more than 200.
I have no idea, but it was wonderful. And I talked about this poem's called "Forgiving My Father." My mother died at a very early age. She dropped dead at 44. And I think that sometimes when that happens, children, the young people look for somebody to blame, something to blame. We do that when people die whom we love. And so we sort of centered on my dad. We figured it was his fault. And I finally wanted to write something about it because I think forgiving one's parents is something one does, or one ought to try to aspire to at some time. And then after that, you try to forgive yourself, which is the hard part, you know. And then I was saying this morning, then after that, I'm going to prepare to have my children forgive me, though they have absolutely no reason to, because I'm quite wonderful. But what do I know? You know, what do they know?
What a darling girl.
Yes. Anyway, forgiving my father. It is Friday. We have come to the paying of the bills. All week you have stood in my dreams like a ghost asking for more time. But today is payday. Payday, old man. My mother's hand opens in her early grave, and I hold it out like a good daughter. There is no more time for you. There will never be time enough, Daddy. Daddy, old lecher, old liar. I wish you were rich so I could take it all and give the lady what she was due. But you were the son of a needy father, the father of a needy son. You gave her all you had, which was nothing. You have already given her all you had. You are the pocket that was going to open and come up empty any Friday. You were each other's bad bargain, not mine. Daddy, old pauper, old prisoner, old dead man, what am I doing here collecting? You lie side by side in debtors' boxes, and no accounting will open them up.
Fascinating to me and wonderful. My mother was 78 when she died, about 10 years ago, and my dad is now 87. It's very interesting to me, there are 6 children in our family, that our relationship with our father now is modified in a way by our relationship with our mother and his with our mother. It's true for all of us. We've talked about it.
It's an interesting thing, and it's something that people don't talk about that much. If a poet does anything, it's look past the obvious and look past the accepted wisdom, you know, the conventional wisdom about things, and talk about things. I don't think you can be a poet, and I know maybe that even leads into this poem. How exciting. One of the things you can't do is ignore things if you're a poet. Somebody asked me, what do you do if you're a poet? You see what you look at, and you hear what you listen to, and you witness, it seems to me. It seems to me important. This poem about cruelty, and I wrote it because, I mean, we're all capable of cruelty. And it bothers me when people talk about cruelty as if only certain people were capable, and they're always loners. You know, it makes you feel guilty if you sit alone in a room and read too much. You start feeling like, oh, next is assassination. I think that we are all capable of it, and we need to recognize that so that we can also recognize in ourselves the capability of great goodness. Anyway, it doesn't have a title. Cruelty. Don't talk to me about cruelty or what I am capable of. When I wanted the roaches dead, I wanted them dead, and I killed them. I took a broom to their country and smashed and sliced without warning, without stopping, and I smiled all the time I was doing it. It was a holocaust of roaches. Bodies, parts of bodies, red all over the ground. I didn't ask their names. They had no names worth knowing. Now I watch myself whenever I enter a room. I never know what I might do. Well, you know, I read somewhere, I think the germ of this poem was, I read somewhere about somebody who was talking about the war, and I think it was Vietnam. And he said that the Viet Cong, I think he said they had no names worth knowing. And I thought, now, how do you extend that? You know, you take that metaphor someplace, and it starts looking as if we're all guilty, or we all are capable of such cruelty.
I've had that impulse. That is, wondering why I I don't feel compassion for the little creatures that I seem to kill when I do. Robert Lowell has a poem about mistreating turtles when he was a little boy, and he speaks of them, he says of them that they have less free will than the mosquitoes I must kill.
Now that leads me to go to a poem that's a newer poem, but it's sort of, I think, in the same thing. Living in southern Maryland, I live in St. Mary's County part of the time, and in Columbia part of the time. And crabs, you know, it's a big thing. Crabs are a big thing in southern Maryland. Well, I guess in Maryland. I don't eat crabs anyplace else. People don't know crabs like I know crabs. But I'm always thinking about crabs. Okay, what is their real name? You know what I mean? Okay, I call them crab. How do I know that's their real name? I have odd thoughts. You have those thoughts, Roland. People think we're mad because we have these thoughts. And I have this poem about, because I don't eat whole crabs, though I love devil crabs. I love crab cakes, and I admit it. But this is in the voice of a crab, called Crabbing. The poet crab speaks. Because I figure there's a poet everything, you know. There's the poet crab, and he's the one that's saying this, and then I have another poem in the voice of a Bigfoot. And I figure the poet Bigfoot is the one that comes down and looks in windows and tries, you know, is curious and wants to know, what are these creatures? Anyway, Crabbing, the poet crab speaks. Pulling into their pots our wives, our hapless children. Crabbing, they smile, meaning us, I imagine, though our name is our best secret. This forward-moving, fingered thing, inedible even to itself, how can it understand the sweet, sacred meat of others? I read that, and then people go out and order like soft shell crabs and feel guilty about it. Oh, gee.
So this is a new poem, Lucille.
Yes. Well, I have two books really ready to come out. One hopefully will be out this year, and this one is a book called The Book of Light, which will be out.
Both books of poems?
Yes, which will be out next year. And I'm really working on a children's book, but I must say I'm working on it less constantly.
Are the books of poems complete new books of poems, or collected or something?
Yes, complete new books of poems. I've been writing a lot since moving back to Maryland.
See?
So when people say you are a Maryland poet, people in California said, well, she just wants to go home. And I keep saying, well, home is Buffalo, New York. But perhaps they know something. Perhaps they're right. There's another new one. And it says something, I think, about how things stay with you and how things connect, because we all know that a poet's mind connects things in an odd way that you can't explain, don't you?
Yes.
That happens. I know from your work that happens. You see something and it reminds you, something else clicks, and one wonders, why are these things clicking when they don't really?
Long ago, T.S. Eliot said something interesting. I'm not a great Eliot fan, but long ago he said something interesting, that most people wake up in the morning and hear street noise and hear their neighbors through the wall, if it's an apartment house, their percolator or their toilet or their argument or anything else, and the sound of birds and the voices of children. He said the poet's intelligence is always trying to make new unities out of these. And to others they're disparate. I think there's something to it,
I think
though
so too.
I couldn't explain it any more than that.
I know, and you don't know why. Why
No.
does this happen? Because with my sister and brother and people who our siblings want to know, okay, why does that happen to you? Why do you see things with these connections and we don't? I have no idea. I've said a lot. If I knew where poems came from, I would go get them.
Right.
Because that would be exciting.
In a way, that's what they're asking.
I know it.
If you'd tell me, I'd go get some.
Yeah, indeed. I have no idea. But this one was, I have another poem about the Philadelphia fire and the house that was bombed in Philadelphia. And I thought about that, and then I was recently in Ohio, and one of the survivors of that fire, Ramona Africa, is in prison there, so that brought her to my attention. And then I thought about one of the complaints about the move people were their hair, because they had dreads, wild, wonderful dreads, you know, and we can see these as wild and unkempt, or we could see them as wonderful. And I thought about Samson, who had hair, and that was his strength, you know, and I thought about him finally giving up his hair and being blinded and then bringing down the temple. And why, I don't know. But this poem is called Samson Predicts the Philadelphia Fire from Gaza. It will be your hair, Ramona, Africa. They will come for you. They will bring fire. They will empty your eyes of everything you love. Your hair will writhe and hiss on your shoulder. They will order you to give it up. If you do, you will bring the temple down. If you do not, they will.
That's wonderful.
Thank you. I'm rather fond of it.
That's wonderful.
And the connection worked for some
Yeah.
reason, and I certainly don't quite see how or why.
I read this morning, in this morning's Washington Post, John Weidman's book on the
Yes,
fire has won the Penn
one of
Faulkner
the Penn
Award.
Faulkner. It's a great book. And certainly the event is metaphor for all kinds of things.
That's what he makes it, I understand. I haven't read it. I heard him read a big excerpt from it once.
But that's what poets do, writers do that. Everything is metaphor.
This is wonderful.
Thanks.
And a great title.
Oh, thank you. Well, I don't know why not. I mean, he could have been in Gaza and said, wait a minute, who is that woman, you know, closed his eyes that could not see anyway, and who is that woman with the wild hair?
Right.
Oh, this is going to happen.
Well, you get to do that in poems, too.
Yes.
You know what
Yeah,
else to
sure,
do.
sure. That's
Someone asked Berryman late in his life what he was working on now. He said, a long poem about the Chinese idea of paradise. The interviewer said, why? He said, why not?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But somebody else asked me once, where do you get ideas from? Well, on the one hand, ideas, you know, I mean, ideas is the beginning of it. I don't know if Philip Larkin said poem doesn't start with an idea, it starts with a poem. But then who was it? I think you told me this story, Roland, about somebody said, I get up every morning, I have to kick him out of the way. I think I've heard you say that. But I mean, there are things all over the place that that connect for you.
Yeah.
It's when you feel, I think you feel your imagination bound by valid connection that you have a hard time.
Well, I also think if you're, this is stolen a little from William Stafford, but if you're hospitable to anything that comes, if you don't insist on Paradise Lost every time you sit down,
Oh, right.
then a lot more things are available to get started with.
And Stafford says, maybe your standards aren't as low as mine. Or
Yes,
something
yeah,
like
he said that. He said, I don't write every day, but I could. And I think everybody else could if their standards were as low as
Yes,
mine.
right. Let's see. Oh, I know a poem. I write about myself a lot. Why not? I always say Weidman said he celebrated himself, so I can do it too, because Weidman was a good person to model after sometimes. But this is a poem called What the Mirror Said. Now, the people at the Senior Citizens Program this morning liked this poem too. And I think that they've all been there, you know. And I was saying that one of the germs for the poem was being at Cambridge Square and visiting my husband once. He was teaching at Harvard. And I looked around, and everybody there was 18, except me, you know. And I always say I was born older than that. And they were all thin, and I mean, it was, you know. And so I wanted to write something about being a woman in a world of girls. And this is called What the Mirror Said. It's kind of sassy. I like to be sassy in poems. Listen, you a wonder, you a city of a woman. You got a geography of your own. Listen, somebody need a map to understand you. Somebody need directions to move around you. Listen, woman, you not a no-place anonymous girl. A mister with his hands on you got his hands on some damn body. That's fun.
That is sassy.
Yeah, well, I try to be sassy. Redefinition is another thing that it's about.
I know what you mean, though, about going in that classroom and seeing everyone looking so young. It's sort of daunting sometimes.
Yeah, if you teach, especially
Yeah.
because the kids stay the same age, and you
That's
just get
right.
older and older all the time.
One morning in Penn Station in New York, I was taking an early train back, and I saw two cops walking along. They looked like babies. Then I
Yeah.
really felt old.
Well, one of the officers at our college is younger than one of my children, and this is terrible to say, but I have to jolt myself to take him very seriously because I can remember diapering people around his age. That's terrible.
Have you had this happen? I now have students whose parents I talk.
Oh, I don't like that, Roland. I try to pretend that I was a child prodigy or something, and people will come up and say, you were my mother's, my father's teacher. I was just in L.A., and a young man came up, and I discovered that he was the son. Now, he was an adult. He was the son of an early boyfriend. And I just kept staring at him, thinking, I could have been your mother. I mean, he was like 6'3". It was quite interesting.
We got about time for one more poem.
All right. Let's find
Got another
another
new one you'd like
yes.
to try on us?
All right. This is one. This is the Samson one and this one are my newest, or the newest. And this is one I was happy about because I saw carved on a gravestone in the South, here lies our Serra, bride of Christ. And it was a Protestant church. Now, I could have understood if it had been a Catholic church, but I tried to imagine myself into the people who carved this. And I also sometimes try to turn the ecstasy of religion and the erotic ecstasy, which I think are something alike, into a poem. And so finally, after a couple of years, here is the poem. Carved on a gravestone in a Southern Baptist churchyard, here lies our Serra, bride of Christ, who opened herself to him, holding her body a bed, until he came completely into her, and she rose in a fever of ecstasy and ran, our good, clean girl, our Serra, away from our tears, away forever from our narrow Protestant arms.
It's terrific.
Thank you.
This has been a lot of fun, Lucille.
Thanks.
We might take this show on the
Well,
road.
let's do it. Let's do it. Oh, my.
And is your school year over?
Almost. Graduation is soon, and then I have a couple of things to do, and then I'm going to sleep. I am tired, and I'm going to sleep for about 2 months.
I was talking to someone about that recently. You feel a kind of cumulative fatigue from the semester, no matter how well it goes.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. And you think, I was telling somebody it ends just in time, because I would have died, if it had been 1 month, 1 week longer. And I had been teaching on a quarter system in California.
Oh, that's
and I only
really
knew
murder,
10 weeks worth of things, though. No, I was quite used to it. I only knew 10 weeks worth of stuff, and here I had to stretch that to 15 weeks. It's very difficult.
But I found quarter system very
Really?
tough.
Well, I was used to it, I guess. I'm finding the semester.
Or the semester system, when it ended before Christmas, that was tough.
Yes.
When it didn't end before.
Oh, before, right.
When you had to come back afterward and pretend that you were
Pretend that you
had a
still
connection,
cared.
or that anyone remembered anything.
It's true. Well,
Good to talk to you.
thank you. Thanks, Roland.
I guess we're out of time. The lights are going down. Now we're supposed to look charming and interested in,
We can do that.
like the McLaughlin.
This has been a presentation of the Howard County Poetry and Literature Society.